Welcome to the Medical Manners Podcast, where I give healthcare providers simple tips for ways they can transform the way they connect with their patients and colleagues. Connecting with patients isn't some secret sauce that some of us have and others don't. They're just skills, implemented consistently over time. If you want to transform your medical practice, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Wyatt, your host. This podcast episode is sponsored by the Connect Better course. This is an audio course for medical providers who want to transform the way they connect with their patients. If you're an individual provider or you have a team of providers who is hoping to improve your patient satisfaction scores, improve your job satisfaction, and boost the prosperity of your practice, this course is for you. It's a 6-week course with an area of focus each week that will teach you specific skills, phrases, actions, and formulas to change the way you connect with your patients. Visit medicalmanners.com and use the promo code PODCAST for 10% off this course. Welcome, Christine. I have Christine Chasse on the podcast with me today. Christine, I don't even know if I know how to say your title right. So why don't you kind of introduce yourself, tell us your title, tell us what you do.
Well, my name's Christine. I used to actually work with you on the floor. I remember back in the days when we were staff nurses. You're more senior than me though, and I'm still a baby. I'm an attorney. I'm a healthcare attorney. I also do like cyber security and compliance. And I'm an associate at the law firm Spencer Fain in Dallas.
So we worked together in Fort Worth, and we were both floor registered nurses, and we had a great time. And I think at the time you were starting law school and I was starting nurse practitioner school. Had you not?
No, I was in graduate school.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So you did graduate school and then law school.
Yes, you got it.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, first of all, just because I'm curious, how did you decide to go into medical law? What inspired you to do that?
I'm not trying to dig on our work, but just being a staff nurse is a really difficult job. You can be set up in so many ways that you're just set up to fail. I make the analogy. So on the coast, right, in the East and the West Coast, they have staffing ratios, mandated staffing ratios, which there really aren't in the middle of the country. Even the Texas Nursing Practice Act doesn't even have anything stating that. Like they said, it's really between you and the employer. And then there's, you can have so many stories of you're set up to fail. You're just so many times, they say, at best you can sign a safe harbor, basically just saying hey, I protest this assignment, but I'm taking it because I don't want you to fire me for insubordination, or I don't want to lose my license for job abandonment. But again, for example, if a teacher calls in, they don't cram 2 classrooms full of kids together, right? Make one teacher teach both, but they regularly do that to nursing. I think my record has been 9 on the med-surg unit and 6 in the ER, and I've had 5 in the ICU, and that just won't, except for the military, I just don't see how that would happen anywhere else, except for places where you don't have protection. That's why I initially wanted to be an employment attorney. Because of that, I kept thinking, well, if I go into administration, things will be better. And honestly, Katie, was kind of just more of the same. There's also a pink ceiling when you get into nursing management, because ultimately the people making those business decisions at the hospital, it's usually, might be a CMO or it could be a non-clinical HCAD. Generally, it's not that person delivering the care, and it's usually not that chief nurse. I was trying to decide between my PhD or law school, since less than 1% of nurses even have a PhD. I think half of them still only have a bachelor's degree, because associates is entry level to practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just took the LSAT. I just took it cold, whatever I get, I kind of left it up to God and the fates and however else.
Wow.
And I got in, and don't do that. If anyone wants advice on going to law school, my first, just take a course, spend the $1,000 and take a course, because all the other people did it.
Well, how amazing that you did it cold and that you succeeded. That speaks a lot about you. That's awesome.
No, that's the difference between a 30% scholarship and 100% scholarship. So.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Okay, so you went to law school, and it was interesting because as I've kind of decided to focus on helping healthcare providers improve the way they connect with patients, there's a lot of reasons that we should do that. But I would say one of the main reasons is because the better we're able to connect with our patients, statistically speaking, the less likely we are to have medical action taken against us. And so as you and I kind of reconnected and you stated the same thing, I thought, wow, I want to get you on here and kind of pick your brain on your experience and any advice you have for us on how we can decrease our risk of lawsuit.
Yeah, so I remember the first time I had just graduated nursing school and I got to work on the floor like with my actual RN license and not the GN license. My preceptor told me, make sure your patients like you. Just make sure they like you, that will save you. And that's honestly true, right? Like, because I was in nursing management prior to going to law school, and when there were complaints, they typically would carve out the good ones, right? They carve out the nurses that they like. Like, well, Barbara was really good to me. Everyone was terrible, but Barbara cared. They'll carve out those people.
Gotcha.
And I've even thought of a couple lawsuits that because I represent providers, I don't do personal injury. A lot of nurse attorneys tend to go that way because they feel like they're still advocating for the patient. But in my sense, that you're advocating for plaintiffs and you're doing that. That's not the same thing as advocating for patients. But I represent providers. I just don't want to turn on them. I've sued on behalf of providers too. I also defend them. And I can think of a couple lawsuits that were brought against people because of, if you didn't seem like you care, right? Like
Gotcha.
one example was this guy he owned a series of like assisted living facilities. His wife was a nurse practitioner, and together they owned these assisted living facilities. And one of the patients, or I guess residents, like on the third day she was there, she fell and she broke her hip. She went to the hospital and she died. She died of complications, because of the fall. But the guy who owned the facility, even though the contract says, hey, day one, like a rent or like apartments, like you owe rent, right? Like, doesn't matter you were there day one, doesn't matter if you were there. But she was in the hospital. She was only there 3 days, fell and was in the hospital and then died. Like, I think if you want to be a nice person about it, you send condolences. I am sorry. Here's some flowers. I'm sorry that happened to your wife, right? I think, but he really doubled down on the rent. He wanted that rent. It was like $5,000. And then even though like contractually the family owed it, the woman and the family owed it, but I mean, just sounds so insensitive. Like, you don't even care about my mom, and he just kept pushing him, saying, come get her stuff. I can't rent this room out. And he's like, my mom's sick. My mom just died. I just came from the funeral. I just buried, like, right. And that turned into a lawsuit. Like, guy got so angry, he finally just sued him. He finally just sued him, saying, like, even though she died of, an infection and stuff in the hospital, right? He sued them for that, for the fall, for the injury. It wouldn't have happened, but it's things like that. Like, if you just care, they wouldn't even thought about suing you, but you made me angry. So many lawsuits, like, it really isn't about money. They really aren't, and I'm saying this as a defense attorney. Most of the time when people do sue, it's not about money. There are examples of, right, it's hard to talk in absolutes. A lot of it's like, you made me mad. You made me mad. I feel disrespected, or I have questions. And the only way I'm going to get this, because now you guys won't tell me anything. Everyone's acting weird. Fine, I'll get a lawyer. We'll find out through discovery. I want those records, and a lot of times there really isn't malice. There really wasn't negligence. It's because they could have communicated better. Gotcha. Another example is, this gentleman came in, he had a necrotizing bowel, like most of his bowel was dead. All of his like colon was dead, small intestine, it was going up to the stomach. They had to remove everything. And this guy wasn't even that old. I think he was just 51. And the medical team were telling the wife, his wife, like, hey, he's going to die. You really need to, like, have it come to Jesus. Like, please come talk to the family, get everyone here. Let's, do last rites. Let's take them off the equipment. And they just weren't going to have it. They're like, no, like, we're not, like, because you see that a lot too, of people like, no, I give up when I want to give up. Like, I want to keep doing this. And the guy ended up walking out of the hospital. I mean, he has a tube now. They amputated a leg. He lives, but they're angry. They're like, you didn't care about him. You told him he was going to die. You gave up on him. And that's the message that the family got. That was the message they got. It's like, I told you he's not going to die. Look, and now you called hospice in and all this other stuff. He totally disrespected us. And look, he's alive. He's alive. Like, here's video footage of us going to Walmart, and I'm getting that kind of stuff and discovering it's not because they messed up. They're not the ones who killed his bowel. They came in like that, but they feel very disrespected, and they're just so mad, and they feel like no one cares about them.
Gotcha. Do you mind, are you at liberty to say what was the outcome of that first lawsuit?
That one settled because, so in Texas, we have something called tort reform. So around, the same year they built the Dallas Cowboy Stadium, instead of putting it on the ballot for, like on the state, like, hey, should we lower the rates? Should we lower the amounts that you could sue providers? They did it kind of sneaky. They did it like on a Tuesday. It was an election day and not on the same ballot. But that year, it was 2008, they passed it and they limited it to $250,000 for your non-economics, for medical malpractice. And that's like, that's your dead baby. That's your wrong leg amputation. That's not a lot.
Yeah.
And they never increased it for inflation. So it's also, for a lot of people, it's kind of not worth it.
Yeah.
It used to be like you can make millions of dollars from it. Now it's mostly trucking cases if you can do that. If you drive around in Texas and you see the billboards, it's usually a car accident stuff. It's not going to be med mal. Med mal, it's up to $250,000, all providers, or $250,000 up to 2 facilities. So,
Gotcha.
you'd have to sue the hospital and the nursing home, and then, another place, maybe you can get up to 500. But then you get your economics, which is like how much your medical bills were and things like that. And that's calculated separately. So because of that, a lot of times some of them are not worth defending, like even if you're right, even if they did nothing right, sometimes it's like you settle it just because it's, well, we could fight
it's not
this.
worth it.
Right. You can't, for a business decision. Like, so it's not like a win or lose, kind of like in criminal law and things like that. Sometimes it's straight up a business decision. Like, we'll just give them some money just to make them go away, make it worth their time. And if you drag it out, now the personal injury attorneys, they use their own money too, because usually they're not, usually the people suing don't have to pay. They're not paying them, right? It's contingent. So they get their money on the settlement. So you have to give them enough too for their attorney's fees. And also they have to split that money with the client. So sometimes you want to settle it sooner. Even if there is no liability, you might settle it sooner just to keep it smaller. But sometimes, like providers, especially physicians, they really want to vindicate themselves. So some of that does go to trial because if they settle it, that goes on their record. Like it goes on your medical liability insurance and it gets reported to the board. So it's not as simple as just the hospital just paying money to make it go away. So a lot of they want to vindicate themselves.
Yeah. Well, and probably in those physicians' minds, they didn't do anything wrong. So they want vindication because medically they did all the medical boxes right? But the thing they were missing, like you said, is, but were you respectful? Were you empathetic? Did you listen? And so in their mind, nothing was done wrong, but in the patient's mind, everything was done wrong. And that disagreements in what was important was what went wrong there.
And sometimes the explanation is not good enough for them, right? Like this particular one, it was an acupuncturist. He did acupuncture and the guy ended up with a chest tube 12 hours later. So even statistically, I don't know if you've ever had acupuncture. Those are really,
I have not.
They're tiny needles. They are smaller than insulin needles. They're really small.
Okay.
And statistically, your lung is more likely to collapse on its own spontaneously than from these needles. But come on, that's a hard sell. That is a hard sell to tell anyone like, no, your lung collapsed on its own. And you're like, dude.
But there was a needle in your back. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's crazy. Okay, so if you could say the number one thing that you see, the number one thing that healthcare providers get sued for, what's the biggest complaint?
Number one, well, just in my experience, which is not going to be statistic, right? Is just my own very small, limited sampling. Oh, I think a lot of it's like people don't understand the regular progression, right? Like skin failure is a thing. Unpreventable bed sores, there's an ICD-10 code for that. I don't think people understand that mortality is 100%. We all die. And I think they have a hard time like understanding it. So a lot of times when I see lawsuits, it actually is negligence. I really haven't had one where they straight up were just negligent. Like they messed up. Like I haven't had a doctor death, where the guy just maiming people left and right. Usually honestly, it's like a miscommunication and I don't understand what's happening and I'm really upset. And I feel like if I'm doing this, like I'm fighting for, I'm advocating for my mom, my sister, my wife, my kid.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were trying to find a way that we could prevent that, maybe that looks like taking a little bit more time to explain what this process is and what are some potential side effects that you could have and what, just like you said, what is that progression like? And maybe more time as providers and as nurses and as medical assistants and CNAs, maybe we could take the time to explain that so that when the situation comes, they're like, okay, we were told that this might happen. I don't know if that would help. There's so much emotion when you're when you're in that situation, there's so much emotion that I don't know if it would help or not.
Yeah, and people read body language, right? They're very sensitive. And if you have any impatience or contempt for any of the questions, or if you feel like you repeat things, like you can't show that. You can't convey that, because to you, that's Tuesday. It's just Tuesday. I mean, this person's dead. Like, no, that's the worst day in that person's life.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's like you can get so
Their world
jaded.
is shattered right now.
Exactly. And I feel like some people do miss that. They're like, yeah, or they want to explain like what a DNR is or things like that. Like, or I think A&D, I think is now like the term that they use for it. It's just explain that that's not giving up. It's trying to have dignity.
Right.
Or, or just people just being non-compliant. We got to use different words than calling someone non-compliant. Or just labeling people.
Right.
And again, like a lot of it, sometimes you can tell in the charting too. Like sometimes you can tell in the charting, even though it's nonverbal, like the provider clearly has contempt for this patient, for this family, that they keep coming back. There's no, well, why do you keep coming back? What happened? Like just trying to just get a big picture. And there's so many different ways that they've trained us, right? Even in nursing school, like you're never supposed to ask a why question. It sounds judgmental. You're supposed to ask open-ended questions, and then meeting people where they're at, right? Like you can't, I know it's best in my mind, right? Like you need to quit smoking. Come on, you've already got stage 4 cancer, but you got stage 4 cancer. You're gonna die. You're ready to die. Your husband just died of cancer. Is that the best thing you should be doing with your life at this point? Should you be on Chantix and trying to cut it, or like, fine, it's just gonna be me and watching the game shows until I die? Instead of forcing your beliefs on people, just try to just meet them in the middle to what they want.
Right. Well, and giving them some options and having them be part of that decision-making process. And I have a course where I train healthcare providers how to connect with their patients better. And 1 week is all about being a team player. Like the patient is on the team and neither of you, like you're a team and you need to know what they want, and you give your advice, and you both have things to bring to that table to make the decision. And you saying that about charting, it makes me think I could probably chart a little bit better. I've never thought about in my charting showing empathy and respect. And I've never thought of that. And I like that idea, making sure that I'm portraying, because I feel like I see patients in that way. I see patients in an empathetic way. I really try to listen. I think I show respect. But I don't know if my charting reflects that. And that's a really interesting point. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, because we assume it's done. I assume you
Right.
hold their hand. I assumed you like consoled her when she cried, because you documented she was crying. I'm just gonna assume you didn't just go in there giving her meds. It goes, okay, anything else? Bye. Like I'm gonna assume there was more to that, but you're right. It's not in there. If you document, like, and I feel like that got me out of an investigation too as a staff nurse. A patient had complained about, I didn't get good care, but I document everything. Like I gave you a blanket, I gave you apple juice. Your dad and your brother-in-law were sitting at the bedside. You were sitting up in high fallers watching television. Like I document everything. Like they took me out of it because like, no, you clearly, like I gave them, like it was something so basic as like a blanket and juice, and I was in your room. Just something as basic as that, like can show like I did care for you. But you're right, just like questions answered, listen to consoled patient, listen, like, and also like someone following up on your charting can like, okay, maybe I need to pick up on that too.
Right. Well, and even using words, and we'll read like a progress note from another provider, and it'll say something like, Mr. H is a 52-year-old, very agitated man who does not want to be here today. Right? Like that'll be the opening line.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of how we could change that so we can still portray that Mr. H was not
anxious.
Mr. H was not doing well.
Yeah.
But how could I do that in a way that doesn't make it seem like I was just like, blowing off Mr. H because he was having a bad day? And so maybe we change the way we chart a little bit and make sure that our words portray what happened, but don't don't know what I'm trying to say here, but don't
It's
throw the
accurate.
patient under the bus either. Or yeah, like throw a dagger at them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I feel like a lot of times they do kind of especially if people are frustrated, like there's always this like you feel vindicated, like put it like when the patient curses at you and you put that in a chart, like, okay, yeah, like you memorialized it, but then
Mm-hmm.
what did you do about it? Right?
Yes.
And that happens, right? There's some people we can't make happy. There's some people who are gonna, I mean, I'm sure you've been called every racial epithet there is. I have been, like everything. I've been called everything. First time, the only time I've ever been called a whore, I was working as a staff nurse. I've never been called that outside of being a nurse.
Oh my word.
So like, yeah, people say stuff like, come on, they're going through Ativan withdrawal, or they're demented, or they're just not all there. If you can just put in there like they're agitated, they said this and offered support, like
Right.
offered it and they were not receptive at this time. Just something like that. Like that way, it's not blaming it, but it's true.
Right. And
Instead of
that's true.
saying,
And in no way am I saying like don't chart what happened, because I think it's important, especially in those high stress encounters. It's important to be very
right,
clear
they
about
did
what
see
happened.
what goes in the chart.
Right. But sometimes we'll use adjectives or descriptive words that right. Maybe we could just kind of tell the truth and then, like you said, tell what we did to try to mitigate that, to try to make that better.
Yeah. Or
Perfect.
yeah. Yeah, that was a great thing you added. This is how can I show like some more support in the charting instead of 43-year-old pleasant male.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Well, my next question is how often, and you kind of answered this, you said a lot of times you settle. And I think what this shows me, if you're able to settle a lot of the time, it proves kind of what we talked about, that the patient really just wanted the wrong to be made right. They don't so much, it's not always so much about the money. So, how often do you feel like you are able to settle and kind of come to a moment where the patient feels like, okay, the problem's been taken care of?
So when I interviewed at my current law firm, one of the things I interviewed, and I made it really clear to them, like, hey, I'm just like, I was a 2-year-old attorney. I've never been to trial, and no one in my team had been in trial in years. So I asked one of the people interviewing me, he'd been there for 8 years. I said, so have you gone to trial? He's like, no, I've never been to trial. And it's been 8 years. 8 years, and he's
Ah,
almost purely med mal. But in this past year, he's been to trial twice, but neither one of them are really med mal cases. These are both providers who lost their privileges at hospitals, and usually, like, if you lose your privilege at a hospital, especially if I think one of them was a heart surgeon, so he has to work in a hospital, and the other one was a hospitalist, right? So, I mean, if you lose your privileges at one hospital, you kind of lose them at the other ones.
yeah,
Yeah, just because they're like, what happened? So so those guys did sue. Those guys did sue. That's not really a med mal case, but those did go to trial.
gotcha. So, a lot of what I do is helping healthcare providers get better patient satisfaction scores. That's a big part of medicine now that I
Yeah.
don't think it was as big of a deal when you and I were nurses.
I think it was the
Um,
Medicare ratings. Yeah, those kind of came up. Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of all emerging, but now, hospital reimbursement is tied to what those patient satisfaction scores show. And so it's a really big deal. It's a really big thing that we hear about a lot. And we'll get patients that go on and on and on. And it is really hard to sit there and listen to them. But I always tell my providers that I'm training, these patients are going to be heard one way or the other. You either listen to them while you're in their visit, and yeah, your visit takes a little longer than you wanted, or you cut them off and they're still going to get their word in because they're going to give it to you on the patient satisfaction survey. So just solve the problem in the moment. Just get it done and let them be heard. And I feel like that's similar here. These patients are wanting things to be made right. And we can either make it right in the moment. And yeah, it takes a little longer and it takes a little effort, or we can go through the suing process and we can go through the settlement process and we can make it right in the end. It's a lot easier to just make it right in the moment. Yeah, it's effort, but it's easier than the rest of the process. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it's not a bad take. Again, sometimes it gets tricky, right? Especially if you're a floor nurse. I remember sometimes you go in there and they're trying to tell you, like, your patient might be trying to tell you about like a garage sale that happened in the 1970s, and you're like, oh my God, I'm trying to give blood to somebody. I'm clearly holding someone's
Someone's
blood.
dying.
It's
Yeah.
got a timer on it, and then on those, sometimes this sounds terrible, but I like would ask colleagues like, page me, give me 7 minutes and page me, like please
Yes.
get me out of here. But the one time, I've only been fired once from a patient, and it was literally that situation. I am holding blood. I was floated to oncology that day. I had to get someone that blood, and this guy like just wouldn't stop, and then I was like, hey, I really need to go. Like I just showed it to him. I was like, I really have to give this. And he got so mad at me. The next time the physician came in, he goes, they want another nurse. And that was the only time I've ever been fired from a patient, was trying to cut him off. And it, because they
Right.
like, I wanted to talk to you and you don't care about me. You won't listen to me. So you're a terrible nurse. They kind of made that big, yeah.
Well, and that's valid. And you made the right decision there, because if you had to pick between giving someone blood or listening about the garage sale, right? Like that, that was the right decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. And you're right.
Oh, but
yeah. And you're right. We can't win every battle. And actually my manager at work will always say, there's going to be 5% of the patients that no matter what we do, we can't please. And I think to some extent that's true. I think even if you're doing every single thing right, you're going to have a couple patients that just aren't happy with what you did.
Yeah, it's kind of like youth, right? Like only if you had a really great experience or you're super mad, those are the ones that like inspire you. It sucks, right? This is the two outliers. Everyone who had an okay experience or was fine, you're not so motivated to give someone a piece of your mind because you expected it. I expected everyone to be nice to me and give me a warm bath and not kill my kid or, not leave with something they didn't come in with. You expect it. So you take it for granted, right? But I think as providers, like anytime I do have good care for my kid, I will nominate the nurses and stuff like that. It's because we've been there. Like, yeah, I'm going to give these 3 nurses the Daisy nominations. Like, because we've been there. Like we totally get it. And that will make they'll just kind of just make them so happy. Because there's not a lot of stuff I think as a staff nurse you can put on your resume, right? Because not everyone's doing employee of the month and that kind of stuff. There's just not a lot you can put on there, so just anything you can do to like reward good behavior we can. But I think only because we've been in that, we know to look out for that and reward people.
Yeah. Well, and like you said that, I don't know if you remember, but at Baylor All Saints where we worked, if a patient wrote in a letter of gratitude and mentioned your specific name, you would get a $100 Visa gift card. Do you remember that?
Yeah. And the president.
Yeah. And so a couple months, I got $100 Visa gift card. At the time, my husband and I were both in school. Like $100 is a lot of money. And I remember my husband said, no, you earned that. Anytime you get one of those $100 gift cards, that's you. Like go shopping, you do whatever you want to do with it. And so that meant so much to me every time someone wrote in and mentioned my specific name, because it meant I had $100 that I could go do whatever I wanted with. And that was such a big treat at that stage of life. And so you're right. I remember that. And now anytime I get a survey back to me, I mention specific names. Like I write down names of people. And I'm like, this person was awesome. This person did this. And I really try to shout them out because it matters. And we've been there and we know what that feels like.
Yeah. But on the other side of the coin too, some of that patient satisfaction stuff I feel like is dangerous. Because I remember being a staff nurse because that was really important. I remember that was really important. They would get those scores back. And I think they're doing away with this, but remember they wanted pain down to 0. It's just not,
which isn't possible sometimes.
Right. Exactly. Right. Sometimes like that chronic pain, you're just gonna have to live with. And as as cold as that sounds, it's really how it is. And that was like the hard thing about it too, is like in the opioid epidemic, everyone's blaming like Johnson and Johnson and all these other like Purdue Pharmacy and stuff. Like no one's ever going to hold CMS accountable for that. They're just not. They're not going to say like, well, you guys made it a 0 and you guys would ding providers if it wasn't a 0. Providers are getting shot. They're literally getting shot. The script pad's getting stolen because this is a horrible epidemic. It's awful. Mm-hmm. And I feel like trying to make that as an indicator of satisfaction, like, yes, there should be pain control, right? There should be. You just had surgery, you broke your leg, like, yes, you should have pain control, but then and then on the other side, some people it's not going to get down to 0. And I feel like that was one of the big things that really did not help the epidemic that, that's currently happening in our cities,
So that's really interesting. And I haven't been a floor nurse for 15 years. How has that changed? Is there now like, what is your pain goal? And you try to make it to the patient's pain goal versus trying to get to 0?
I think there was I think they're trying to do away with it because I remember when we were nurses, it was a 0. The goal was 0 or like, what's realistic for you? You know what I mean? And it's not ever supposed to be like above a 4 or something. So it's like, it's not going to you know?
Right. Right. Huh, that is really interesting. I'd forgotten about that. Well, one of the things I like to ask patients when I'm interviewing patients on here is what matters most that your healthcare providers do for you. So I guess I'm going to flip that on you and say, as a medical attorney, in your opinion, what matters most? What's the most important thing that we need to be doing as healthcare providers to avoid having to hire you someday?
Yeah, no offense taken at that. Honestly, it's having honor, really having honor and doing the right thing. Like being able to stand up, like if you don't agree with certain orders or if you need to go above someone's head or get some of the appropriate treatment, you can't be like, well, I called the RT, I'm done. Like, no, there was something wrong. You need to keep going with it. Like trust your gut. You have an instinct. You can't just be like, it's up to them. Like, no, like you take ownership. I've worked on cases where you can, like this woman was ambulating, right? She had a hip replacement surgery. She was ambulating. OT, she fell with OT. OT was right there. She fell. She broke her femur. Even though she just had a hip replacement, now the
Oh
femur
my
broke.
gosh.
Right. And then she's like, "Oh, sorry, I get, that's horrible. Let's just take you back to bed." And she was done, but it was like the PT assistant who's like, "Nah, there's something wrong." Like she was assessing it. She called the surgeon herself. The PT assistant was the one who called the surgeon. I was like, "I need you to get up here." Then she went, for a nailing, another surgery afterwards. But the nurse didn't do that. The OT didn't do that. I mean, she has a master's degree. It was the PT assistant that cared enough that she even took it upon us to call the surgeon. No one else did that. So it's like having the
Mm,
honor and just if everything was truly in the patient's best interest, instead of like, of course it's supposed to hurt. You had surgery there, instead of like, no, she broke something else now.
yeah.
Like it buckled and she fell. So
Yeah.
it's like if your best interest is truly in the patient, it's really aligned with that, and you're doing your job, like that's the best thing you can do, because it can come out. Like we will do our investigation, and if you did everything right, that's so much easier for me to defend you if you did everything
Right.
right and there was nothing more you could do. You see that too sometimes where people are like, yeah, I did it. A notified physician, done, or didn't. And
Yeah.
then you feel like it's not my fault. Like diagnostics is not supposed to be my fault or problem. Like, yeah, that's true, but you're not going to know if the nurse doesn't tell you. You're the one that's there. You need to tell someone.
Right. So maybe, and kind of what I'm hearing you say is this is how I'm interpreting it. If that were my mom, that just happened to, what would I want done? And as a provider, my responsibility is to do that thing. Even if it is more time out of my day, or even if it is a little bit harder, I'm going to treat that person with honor and integrity the way I would want my mother cared for.
And
And
don't go back in that chart 2 days later and start adding stuff to your, like, no, like that looks bad. That looks so bad. Just have honor. You don't
yeah,
need to go poking around. Just do everything you're supposed to do in a timely manner. Like I don't feel like I'm asking for anything crazy. I feel like that's the floor. I
yeah,
really feel like that's the floor, Katie. Like do your job and like do it with some honor and
and
integrity.
have honor. I love that. I love that word too you used. Kate, this is another question that just came into my mind because I've never, knock on wood, I've never been sued as a provider. Is there a period? So let's say I do something wrong and the patient's mad. What is the period between that patient's mad and I'm going to hire a lawyer and sue? Is there a period there where I kind of know they're mad and I have a chance to work through things with them? Or does that not happen until lawyers hired, we're in the process?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good question. Sometimes there are clues. Like I remember as a staff nurse, like I had paper notes, and I also had in addition to the computer notes. And sometimes I'm like, I'm keeping these. Sometimes you're
Mm-hmm.
just like, I think I'm like, this was bad, especially if it was like a bad outcome,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it came in there and something happened or something was really unusual. And that's why also your charting should always be super specific, because if they pull it out and you don't know what they're talking about, like you need to refresh your own recollection, right? And there's so many times too, Katie, I'd come back in the next morning and the night nurse didn't document anything. Like, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
who taught them charting by exception, but like that doesn't mean you don't document crap, like
Right.
document
Right.
you looked at them, document they were breathing, like
Yeah.
you got nothing else to say. Sometimes there's clues, right? So in Texas, we have like a 3-year statute of limitations plus 75 days, because you got 75 days for them to find an expert. So Texas does make it kind of hard. It's very provider friendly. The physicians do have a very strong lobbyist group. just like good news for the providers. You have to, so when you have like 3 years from your injury plus 75 days, you have to find an expert who's the same. For example, if I'm suing you, Katie, like I would need to find a nurse practitioner who is the same licensure as you. If you're a family nurse practitioner, I also need a family nurse practitioner to write me an opinion about all the ways you messed up. Here's a standard of care and how you breached it, why you fell short, and you caused the injury. You have to connect these things, and that has to be without, like, after I file a lawsuit, I got 3 years and 75 days. I file a lawsuit. Whoever you're suing has to answer within 30 days, and after their 30 days, they have 120 days to file that expert report. And if you don't have that expert report, it's done. It's gone. It's dismissed. It didn't matter how good your case was, which sucks, because I've seen a couple that were really good. They just didn't find an expert. They didn't do it in time.
Wow.
And then, or it's the wrong kind. Like you're a nurse practitioner, a physician cannot opine on a nurse practitioner standard of care. Like, he can't opine on the injury, like if it caused it. Like, because you did this happened. He can say that part, but he can't opine on your standard of care. Like a nurse practitioner can't say, well, this surgeon messed up. Like, no, you're not a surgeon, so you can't tell me how they messed up. So that'll get tossed. So sometimes sometimes when, for example, that lady who fell, her husband happened to be a lawyer, and he happened to be in the room when that happened. And he was a personal injury attorney. Even though he's retired, he sent a very angry letter saying, I refuse to pay for anything. By the way, I'm a lawyer. By the way, I was also a judge. So something like that. Yeah, you're going to go ahead and call your...
Yeah, you're going to know.
Yeah, you're going to call your legal counsel or your insurance company, and they'll give you a lawyer.
Gotcha. Oh, well, that is so interesting. I don't know much about your line of work, and so it's so interesting for me to kind of hear all of your answers to this. So thank you so much for taking time for doing this. I think this is going to help our listeners. I know it's going to help me change a couple things. I hope to make sure I'm practicing with honor, and then chart accordingly, and making sure that I'm charting my empathy and my honor in my chart. So thank you for spending time talking to us.
Yeah, thanks for being open to learning.
Yeah. If people want to find you, tell me what practice you work for in Texas, just in case any of the listeners want to find you later.
Sure. I'm at Spencer Fain. It's a large law firm. I think we have offices in several states. I'm in the Dallas office, and I'm only licensed in Texas. I can only help you if it's in Texas, but if you're in Minnesota or California, I do have colleagues like in different states, and we can send you someone to help you. But the group I'm in is the only one that does medical malpractice in the entire firm. Again, it's not super lucrative as it was.
Lucrative. Okay.
It wasn't lucrative as it was, and some states don't have tort reform. Like Florida is one of those where, the personal injury attorneys can fly around in helicopters and jets still, and some of them do, but not so much in Texas. But again, it doesn't happen a lot, but because of that, because it's not very lucrative, because there's not a lot of money on that table, and because a lot of people aren't doing it anymore, pretty much the only suits that get filed, it's a straight up, like, it's almost, for them, it's a good case. For them, they think it's a slam dunk. It's not going to be, maybe. No, it's got to be something really good, because that personal injury attorney is going to be out of pocket defending this until eventually they can settle for, at most, $250 plus the economics. You got it.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not lucrative. So I also do a lot of compliance work, right? Like I write the HIPAA policies for hospitals and help them with cyber attacks and ransoms and things like that.
Gotcha. Oh my gosh. Well, that's also interesting. Someday I want to pick your mind on all of that, because that is so interesting. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time and appreciate you being willing to share with us.
No, thank you for you. And thank you for all you do and how you try to help everyone else. Appreciate it, Katie.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're a patient and have a great story about a time that a healthcare provider gave you awesome care, or you're a healthcare provider who has a story about a colleague or yourself who gave incredible care, I want to hear about it. Reach out to me at Medical Manners on Instagram, or send an email to Katie, Katie, at medicalmanners.com. Together, we can transform the way we deliver healthcare by transforming the way we connect. Take care.